Welcome to The Explainer. It's incredible to think about, but in India, just one court ruling can literally change the lives of over 1 billion people. So today, we're going to dive into some of those landmark verdicts, the ones that have shaped everything from our personal freedoms to really the very soul of the nation. So, how can one decision from a courtroom have such a massive ripple effect? Well, we're going to get into it by looking at these huge court battles, the ones that fought for basic human dignity, the ones that drew a line in the sand with the power of the state, and the ones that took on some of the most complicated issues modern India has ever faced. All right, so first up, let's talk about the cases that really got down to the fundamentals. I mean, the most basic right of all, right? The right for every single person to live with dignity and to actually be recognized by the law. We're going to focus on two really pivotal cases here. And what's fascinating is that even though they're decades apart, they both show the court stepping in to protect the most vulnerable among us. And in doing so, they completely changed the game, legally, for women and for transgender communities. Okay, so let's start with the story of a 62-year-old woman named Sha Bono. Her personal fight for just a little bit of support, well, it ended up becoming this huge national flashpoint. So picture this. In 1978, her husband divorces her using what's known as triple talaq, basically an instant divorce. And just like that, she was left with absolutely nothing to support herself or her 5 kids. So what did she do? She took her fight to court, just asking for basic maintenance. And amazingly, the Supreme Court sided with her. It was a huge moment for women's rights. But, and this is a big but, it set off this massive political firestorm. The backlash was so intense that the government actually passed a new law in 1986, the Muslim Women Act. And this new law was, well, let's just say it was really controversial, with a lot of people arguing it basically watered down the Supreme Court's progressive decision. Okay, so that was one crucial fight for recognition. Now let's jump forward a few decades to another case, one that would completely rewrite the rulebook on how the law even defines gender.
You have to understand, for decades in India, transgender people just didn't exist legally. They had no official identity. And what does that mean? It means you're shut out from everything: education, jobs, even basic health care. So the National Legal Services Authority, which is also known as NLSA, took this fight for basic recognition all the way to the Supreme Court.
And the court's decision? Honestly, it was nothing short of transformative. By officially recognizing a third gender, the court sent a powerful message that fundamental rights don't fit into a neat little binary. It was a declaration that the Constitution is there to protect everyone. This was a truly monumental win for human rights in India. So we've talked about individual identity. Now let's shift gears to another really critical area. Think of it like a constant tug of war. On one side, you've got a citizen's freedom, and on the other, the power of the state. And we're going to look at 3 cases that are just absolutely essential here. They get into everything: what we can say online, how we should be treated by the police, and our basic fundamental right to a speedy trial. So let's kick things off with a case that deals with a massive question for our digital age, right? Where do you draw the line between free speech and causing harm online? The whole fight was focused on one super controversial piece of law. I mean, just think about that for a second. There was a law on the books that could land you in jail for 3 years for sending an electronic message that someone in power thought was annoying. Seriously, it was so broad, so vague, it was basically an open invitation for misuse. And this right here is the heart of the problem. Look at the words the law used: annoyance, inconvenience. I mean, what does that even mean? The Supreme Court basically said the same thing, that this was way too subjective, dangerously so. So they struck the whole section down, calling it what it was: a direct threat to our freedom of expression. All right, so we've gone from the virtual world of online posts to something very, very physical: the handcuff, a pretty clear symbol of state power. And on this issue, the court completely flipped the script. See, for years, handcuffing someone while moving them from place to place was just standard procedure. It was the default. And a lot of the time, it felt like it was more about humiliation than actual security. So here's the absolute game changer. The court declared that dignity is the default setting. Freedom from handcuffs is now the rule. And any kind of restraint, that's the exception, and it has to be justified in front of a judge. It was a huge step in protecting the basic dignity of anyone who's accused of a crime. But what happens after the arrest? What happens when the justice system itself becomes a kind of prison? This next case, it brought to light this massive, truly heartbreaking injustice. We're talking about thousands of people just rotting in jail for years, and not because they were found guilty of anything, but because they were just waiting for their trial. When the court dug into this, what they found was just shocking. Many of these people, called under trials, and they were often the poorest, most vulnerable people in society, had already been locked up for longer than the maximum sentence they could have possibly gotten if they were convicted. It's unbelievable, and it's because of this case that the right to a speedy trial was officially established as a fundamental right. All right, for our final section, we're looking at cases that had these huge, sweeping impacts on all of society. We're talking about the very land people live on, incredibly deep-seated religious conflicts, and really, the future of the entire nation. First up here is a landmark moment for environmental justice in India. The case, well, it established a really simple but incredibly powerful idea. If you make the mess, you have to pay to clean it up. The polluter pays principle. And this was about so much more than just pollution. The court connected a healthy environment directly to the fundamental right to life itself. They looked at the absolute devastation in villages like Bitri, and they laid down the law with the polluter pays principle. And that meant, for the first time, industries were on the hook financially for fixing the damage they caused. It set a massive precedent for holding corporations accountable. So from the physical environment, we now turn to the landscape of faith. And this next one, it's one of the most complex, most sensitive, and longest-running disputes in the entire history of modern India. At its very core, this was a dispute over one single plot of land in Ayodhya that went back centuries. It's a place considered sacred by Hindus as the birthplace of Lord Rama, and also by Muslims as the site of the Babri Masjid. The whole conflict just exploded in 1992 when the mosque was demolished, which then sparked violence across the country. And after decades and decades of legal fights, the Supreme Court finally delivered its verdict in 2019. It awarded the land for a temple to be built and also allocated a different plot of land for a new mosque to be constructed. So when you look at all of this, from individual dignity to the environment, it's clear that India's judiciary has been this incredibly powerful engine for social change. It proves that the law isn't just some dusty old book. It's a living, breathing thing that evolves. And that just leaves us with one big question, right? What's the next great challenge it's going to have to face?